everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. It's so wonderful to see such a great crowd in this beautiful gallery. If this is your first time in the Stedman Gallery, I invite you to come back. We are guests here. I invite you to come back later when you have more time and explore Picturing Camden, which is the current exhibition. Some really amazing visual art, all featuring the city of Camden. So I'm here to welcome Leah Falk. I'm here to welcome you to the 9th annual, this is really kind of getting toward a milestone for us, the 9th annual Writers in Camden reading series, put on by the MFA program here at Rutgers-Camden and the Writers' House. We also owe a big debt of thanks to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences and, of course, the National Endowment for the Arts. So, just applause for our federal agencies. Tonight we have two wonderful writers, Diane Seuss and Eileen Pollack. Before I introduce Judson Packard, who will introduce Diane, I just want to have a parenthetical note that if you enjoy this series and other programs that the Writers' House and the MFA program put on, you can, most of them are free, but you can support them with your dollars if you so choose by going back to the place where you RSVP'd for tonight's program and clicking on register, and that'll give you an option to make a small donation. So if you feel so moved, you will be supporting and continuing the accessibility of programs like this one for tonight and onward. So to be very brief, I'd like to introduce Judson Packard, who will introduce to you our first reader, Diane Seuss.
Hi, I'm Judson Packard. Diane Seuss is the author of 3 collections of poetry. Her second collection, Wolf Lake White Gown Blown Open, won the Juniper Prize for Poetry. Oh no. And last year, her collection, Four-Legged Girl, was nominated for the Pulitzer. Her use of imagery is stark and beautiful and something I'm personally in awe of.
Hi. So excited to be here. I have a former student in the audience who I haven't seen for years, and getting to read with Eileen, and thank you, Leah, for making this happen, and all my new friends I met tonight. Shared some good food, a little wine. Okay, so I'm going to read for 20 minutes. Hold me to it. So if I go over, gesture wildly. Okay? You're like, So here's my plan. I'm going to read a couple sonnets that are part of new work, new stuff that I'm working on, for a collection that's kind of a memoir in sonnet form. And then I'm going to read a couple poems from my collection coming out in May called Still Life, with 2 dead peacocks and a girl. And you have to have some dead bird in the title. I just think it works. And then I'll read a couple poems from Four-Legged Girl. How's that sound? All right. So glad my friend Gregory's here. So these first couple are pretty straight up memoir sonnets, and they'll give you an idea of where I'm from. Don't let it scare you. I floated, I flew, I fell to earth to learn the pleasures of the low down, which meant sometimes going downtown to the Ready Theater to get my ticket punched by old Hook for a hand, I feared ambulances, janitors, knives, dogwood, blossoms, my sister's boyfriends, one of whom threw a knife at my head, one of whom pressed his whiskers into my face and whispered things, my girlfriend's boyfriends, one of whom shot me in the bone behind my ear at a shooting gallery. My unspayed dog's periods, we put her in my sister's bikini underpants stuffed with a Kotex pad. The girl whose eyes were crossed, cowboy boots on the wrong feet. The birthmark girl, Dwight who saw through me, little S hit and killed by a Jeep on 13th Street, the guy who hit him sticking his tongue in my mouth at an adult party. Jesus, the eschaton, which I learned from a well-read Jehovah's Witness was a synonym for the end of the world. My Father resurrecting, my Father not resurrecting, I feared, floating, flying, falling, the lowdown. You get a feel for it? Fun, fun. We all have our stories, don't we? Labels now slip off me like clothes when I was in the dark with some daddy man. And I could turn anyone into a daddy man with my stupendous mind, which is how I thought about things when I was 14, and some half-rapist was scraping the tears off my cheeks with a milkweed pod in his 2-room house on the riverbank. So many boys back home lived without parents. In Fuckerson Park, where most of us lived, or the edge of Fuckerson, where some of us teetered, ready to tip onto 17th Street, where all the shacks were painted Kool-Aid colors, or the nameless dirt road that led to Bob's Country Club, among the shitholes, where all the dogs were named Pee-hole, and one big colonial prefab house from when the Lord led Julia to the right lottery ticket, which wasn't worth the resentment heaped on her by the rest of us. Even Jesus, she said, resented her and punished her like he does with 1,000 paper cuts that added up, which made the rest of us feel better. And that is the job of Jesus, the most daddy-ish daddy man of all. Okay, so I'm going to save one of those for the end. So this is a piece from my next book, which is called Still Life with Two Dead Peacocks and a Girl. And portraiture and still life painting is kind of the frame for my continued fascination with the rural and what the rural has to do with art. Eden, an outline. 1. The question has been, can I accommodate this Eden? A, without apples or Adam. B, the only thing slithering, the black sky wriggling free of the stars. C, the smoke tree. 1, hazy poofs of rusty fuzz. 2, like a circle of unshaved redheads in mid-strip tease. D, not hyacinths, not hydrangeas. 1, but 6-foot-tall stalks covered in unlanguaged vulgarities. 2, put my ear close and hear something like foie. A, foie, darling. 3, the lipstick center. 4, stamen the color of cream beaten toward butter. E, smoke tree sitting back and blowing smoke rings. 2, the erotic is Eden. A, in grade school a kid said the clitoris is a pip or a pearl. B, he said fuck had to do with a finger. 1, and a Dixie cup. Doesn't it? C, then I learned that women were flowers. 1, and fucking had to do with pollination. 2, and bee stings. 3, sometimes the stinger gets stuck inside. A, that'll kill a bitch. 3, what if Eden is a storage container for withheld wisdom? A, withheld, withheld, withheld. B, my grandmother at 92 letting tears rim her little fox eyes about how her husband, after all those ducks and geese, and heaving the mess of bluegills on the porch for her to clean, decided to give up hunting. 1, his glass eye finally won the argument about killing it had been having with the good eye. 2, after all those pin feathers, she said. A, and let out a long withheld sigh. 4, the white-tailed bird comes close until it decides to be afraid. A, I see the mechanism of fear. 1, not a gear in the brain, but an old decision that digs a grave that erodes into a canyon until nearly everything, A, falls in. B, fear with its largesse, its spangled silver gown, its icy bracelets. C, worry, the little sister in dress-up clothes, believing if she's only alert enough, she can detoxify the snake. 5, I want no Eden without my mother and sister in it. A, if my mother and sister live outside the fence, 1, I live outside the fence. B, my mother climbing the ladder and pulling rotten leaves out of the eaves. C, my sister using her index finger like a hook to pull the blood clots out of the mouths of the dead. 1, or the impacted turds from the asses of the demented and insane. D, if I can welcome them in, 1, I will find a way to welcome them in. 6, like a dog in winter, those inside the gates want out, those outside the gates want in. A, did I tell you about my niece who moved to Orlando to get away from the soybean fields? 1, she got a job taking tickets at Disney World. 2, her husband a pipe fitter at SeaWorld. A, these days, he said, it's all about serving the dolphins. The dolphins don't serve you. 3, in the dead of winter, they packed up and moved back home. A, jerked the girl out of school. She was finally understanding fractions. B, unpacked the truck. 1, trampoline. 2, saltwater aquarium. 3, the dog, Girly. C, and started planning a trip to Disney World. 7, the problem with Eden is that it is eternal. A, it's like that Twilight Zone episode. 1, no, not that one, the other one. 2, the one with the train on a circular track. 8, the problem with Eden is letting yourself have it. Even after you've wrecked it, it comes crawling towards you with its purple mouths, like an army of beaten children. 2, like a ruined dog. A, it puts its head in your lap and gives you its stillness. 3, it comes buzzing back. A, like a purple-throated bird with a hypodermic beak. 1, obsessed with your sweetness. Okay, so a poem from Four-Legged Girl Who Had Four Legs. So I spent some years in New York City. I didn't fit. Actually, I was the queen of the Lower East Side. Either everything is sexual or nothing is. Take this flock of poppies. Smoke green stems brandishing buds the size of green plums, swathed in a testicular fur. Even those costumed in the burlesque of red crepe petals have cocks under their skirts, powdered with indigo black pollen, straining everything they touch. Either the whole world is New Orleans at 3 a.m. and a saxophone like a drill bit, or it's all clinical sunlight and sad elementary school architecture circa 1962. No broom closets opening into escape hatches, no cow pokes with globs of sap skewered on hickory sticks. Either it's all New York in 1977, the Pan Am building lit up like a honey hive and erecting itself out of the fog, and one of us is a junkie and one of us is naked under a gold skirt safety pinned at the waist, and the material melts in the rain. Either Kinky is playing the Lone Star and Earth is the women's John at the tail end of the bar, and the stall doors have been blow-torched at the hinges and dragged away by horses. Either cunnilingus is an ocean salting every alleyway and lifting every veil, or the French teacher did not masturbate beneath a desk as he taught the subjunctive, and lightning did not cleave the cherry tree and pleasure its timbers. Either straitjacket or shock treatment, orgasm igniting the dinner theater, the actors cradling and hair pulling, kissing each other so deep some might call it brain surgery. The wigs slipping, chintz curtains of flame, cod pieces bursting into flower. Or what's left is a book of wet matches, my dear, and it's all been for nothing. For didn't Jesus say, "You are either with me or against me," from out of his blossom of bloodshot dust? That's him. That's Jesus. I'll end with two short sonnets, and let me dedicate these to my friend Gregory Pardlow. I fell on an incline, talus, tibia, fibula, calcaneal tendon mangled, red circuits ruptured, body facing east toward a little town named Climax, and then New York, where I once danced in a circle of girls at Kay's sister's wedding. Broom, shattered glass, him in his parents' bathroom pilfering benzos from the medicine chest. And now his grave, lonely in sunlight in Sag Harbor. My leg twisted west toward the lake, sunset, San Francisco, where Mikkel, covered in chaos lesions with his last $50, took me in a cab to see the Conservatory of Flowers. Actually, only the zinnias. Just look, he said, a yellow that made my eyes ache. But nothing thus far compares to bone pain except childbirth. Put a bullet, I begged my ex-husband, right here, pointing to my temple. Leg inert in a black cast for months, dead grandma's wheelchair, son by then a junkie, blank and mean. I crawled to the cold road pleading for help. Humbled yet, queen? And then this, finally, and thank you again for listening. So John Donne was known for many a thing, but one, his sonnets about sort of wrestling with God. There is a force that breaks the body, inevitable. The byproduct is pain. Unexceptional is a rain gauge, which has become arcane, rhyme likewise, unless it's assonant or internal injury. Gloom, joy, which is also a dish soap, but not the one that rids seabirds of oil from wrecked tankers. That's Dawn, which should change its name to Dusk. Irony being the flip side of sentimentality here in the Iron Age. Ironing out the kinks in despair, turning it to hairdo from hair. To do, vexing infinitive. Much better to be pain's host, body of Christ as opposed to the Holy Ghost. When I have been suffering at times, I could step away from it by embracing it. A blues thing, a John Donne thing. Divest by wrestling, then sing. Thanks.
Matt Stallnecker will now introduce Eileen Pollack.
Thanks so much, Diane. Hailing from Liberty, New York, prolific novelist, essayist, and short story writer Eileen Pollack has cemented herself amongst a rare breed of writers. Having received her BS in physics from Yale University and an MFA from the University of Iowa, Eileen blends her passion for science with a love of storytelling and meaning-making. In a 2015 interview with Kelly Hoong, Eileen said, "Studying physics instilled in me an awe for our existence. I can't take anything for granted, least of all the fact that the universe came into being from nothing, that it's as vast and complex as it is, that we somehow evolved from a bunch of molecules and some energy. When I turned to writing, I couldn't take anything for granted about what it means to be human." Throughout her career, Eileen has moved fluidly between genres while simultaneously covering a wide range of subjects. Her 2012 Grub Street National Book Prize winning novel, Breaking and Entering, chronicles the Shapiro family's move from Marin County, California to rural Michigan, a radical shift that highlights a deeply divided America soon to be thrown into crisis by the Oklahoma City bombing. A work of nonfiction published in 2015, The Only Woman in the Room, Why Science is Still a Boys' Club, examines the social barriers that still prevent many young women from envisioning themselves as future scientists and mathematicians, while Eileen's most recent novel, A Perfect Life, follows Jane Weiss, a brilliant research biologist working to discover the genetic marker for Valentine's disease, a neurodegenerative disorder that killed her mother and one she herself may carry. Here to share her work with us this evening, it's my great pleasure to introduce Eileen Pollack.
Thanks, Matt, for chauffeuring me around in that terrific introduction. And thanks all of you for coming. You know, the novel Breaking and Entering, I wrote a long, long time ago, and it was sort of about people, you know, Michigan was such a divided state. When I moved there, I just couldn't believe that there were people who were, you know, so far to the left, so far to the right, living like next door to each other. And I was like, how do you make a state out of that? How do you make a country out of that? And I wrote the novel and sent it out, and the editors in New York are like, what are you, nuts? You know, there aren't people like this militia people and KKK, you know. It took a long time to get it published, and now, it's funny enough, people believe me. But I've been really down about things lately, and what keeps me going are events like this and being with my people. You're my people. And so I want to thank you all for coming, and thank Leah Falk for arranging this. Leah's not a former student, but she was a student in the program I directed. She's a wonderful writer, and this is just such a great program and a great place. So anyway, thanks to all of you, and Diane, that was just such a terrific reading. So I'm going to read a little bit from A Perfect Life, and I'll just tell you a little how it came to be, read a little bit from the first chapter and then a few pages from later in. So in the 1980s, I was married to a geneticist. We were living in Cambridge, and he was working on his doctorate. And everybody in the lab, so they didn't have any markers for genetic diseases. They knew the DNA, right, you know, had something to do with, diseases you did or didn't get, but they hadn't yet figured out how to develop tests so you could see, like, well, this glitch in your DNA means you're going to get such and such a disease. And there was one group in his lab that were working to find the genetic marker for Huntington's chorea, which is this really awful neurological disease. And what really interested me was one of the researchers was this woman named Nancy Wexler. And first of all, there just weren't that many women scientists, so I was very interested in Nancy. She was this beautiful, really warm, outgoing young woman who was doing this amazing research. But what really got me is she was worse. So her mother had died of Huntington's. And it's a terrible death. Really, it's lingering and you just degenerate in all these ways. And so she stood a 50-50 chance of having gotten the bad gene from her mother. And so did her sister. And so her father, who obviously was worried about his daughters, had used his money to set up a foundation to do research to try to find first a test for and then a cure for this disease that might kill his daughters. And so Nancy was working on this. And the idea that you would be working to find the gene for this test for this disease you might or might not have, that it killed your mother, that might lead to you dying this awful death, really seemed very powerful. And Nancy and her sister had decided that unless they knew they didn't have the disease, they were not going to get married and have kids and like pass on to their kids what, they had gone through. So she was in her 30s, and like the idea that so my husband was already, he was in the lab 24/7. In case you were wondering, he's my ex-husband. And he's racing, like so many of us feel like, oh my God, I'm going to die someday. I have to achieve something or else what, you're going to die anyway and nobody's going to remember. But we all think, I have this clock ticking in my head. Oh my God, if I don't do all this stuff before I die, right, what? But here the clock was really, ticking, if while she was still in her 30s, she could find the marker, test herself, test her sister, and she didn't have the disease, she could get married and have kids. And, the drama of that, as a writer, certainly I thought, wow, I could write that. But also, anytime there's a clock ticking, right, you have a short story, you have a novel, you have a play, you have a movie. So I decided to write a novel based on Nancy's life, but I wanted to be able to change things, and so I made Huntington's be this disease called Valentine's chorea, and I changed some things, but basically it's based on this woman's life and her father funding this research so that they could find the disease, the marker for the disease that killed her mother. So I'll just read you from the beginning, and then I'll fill in the other major thread of the plot after that. In another few minutes, I will need to climb the stairs and explain to my daughter why her father and I gave her life when we knew she would need to live it watching the clock, watching herself. Maybe Lila won't hold her fate against me any more than I held my fate against my parents. But then I was older. I knew they had acted out of ignorance, and how could I condemn the very people to whom I owed my existence, enthralled as I was with the mystery, the miracle of being Jane Weiss? Maybe we're all divided into those of us who think that our parents' choice in giving birth needs to be explained, and those for whom such a demand would seem incredible. We fell in love, we got married, we had a child, we had you. We're divided too, I think, into those of us who live with a clock ticking in our heads and those of us who don't. I've heard my own clock ticking since my earliest years, a decade before I learned that the word Valentine's means more to our family than a holiday of love. The story I'm about to tell begins with such a clock, or more accurately, a timer, the cheap plastic kind you use to cook eggs. I was working in my lab, not the lab I work in now. This was my lab at MIT when I was only a postdoc. It was a Friday at 6 p.m., and I could hear the timer ticking backward toward 0. I was due to meet my father across the bridge in Boston in less than 15 minutes. But first, I had to extract the DNA from one last blood sample. In my right hand, I held a sterile pipette. In my left hand, a test tube. The iron-heavy red cells had sunk to the bottom. White cells floated in the middle. A faint yellow serum lay spread across the top. It reminded me of one of the tropical Jell-O parfaits my mother used to serve us before she stopped cooking. I started to work the rubber cork from the test tube with the thumb and index finger of the same hand that held it. I'd done this a million times. It was one of those small acts of competence that helps us believe we are what we claim to be. We know what we're doing. The mistake I made this time was watching my hand, thinking about my clumsiness, worrying. I foresaw what would happen. I would be left holding the cap while my 3 other fingers let the tube of blood fall. I tried to prevent this, but my hand wouldn't respond and the tube dropped to the linoleum. Flora Drury, the woman from whose veins this blood had come, was 34 years old, 1 year older than I was, but she looked at least 50. When I had entered the Drury's trailer earlier that day, she had been sitting in the kitchen with her eyes rolled toward the light, head swiveled, fingers clutching the edge of her red vinyl chair. She vibrated as if the chair were electrified. Her teeth chattered, click, click, click. Flora's husband, Matt, a jut-toothed man in overalls, had given his consent for the procedure, but I insisted on making clear to every new donor why we needed his or her blood. As I pronounced the words, "a cure for Valentine's chorea," Flora's shaking grew frenzied. The metal legs of her chair danced across the floor. Flora's head, which was covered with dry reddish tufts like the petals on a marigold, rattled on her neck. I knew what was coming, but knowing what's coming doesn't always calm us. The more a person knows, the more her nerves tightened. When Flora barked, "Yes," my heart catapulted around my chest. I tried a trick I had perfected. Eyes closed, I inhaled, imagining the air to be liquid concrete, filling my body, hardening. By the time I let my breath out, the trembling had nearly stopped. "All right, then," I said. I pried Flora's hands from the chair, then held her fragile arm while Rita Nichols, our nurse, tied a length of rubber tubing around Flora's bicep, pinched the wax paper skin to locate a vein, and plunged a needle deep in the crook of Flora's elbow. After a few moments, Rita yanked the needle out. A bright drop of blood rose from Flora's skin, and Rita slapped it with a gauze pad. She was always brusque with donors. "You tell that husband of yours he'd better keep you clean or I'll report him to the authorities," she had told Flora earlier, with her husband looking on. I was brusque, but for a different reason. If I had opened my mouth to tell Flora I was sorry for any pain we might cause, I wouldn't have been able to stop apologizing. The tube of Flora's blood was as foamy and warm as freshly cooked jam. I slipped it in the rack beside the other samples we had drawn from Flora's family. Not even the youngest child, a boy of 6, had made a fuss or cried. His father loomed above us, snapping one of Rita's used tourniquets, and I hoped the boy's obedience came from love and not fear. I was disposing of the syringes when Flora leaped from her chair and spun about the room, arms flailing, chin tucked against her chest. "Shit on Valentine's," she screamed. Then she froze where she stood. Speechless, immobile, arms overhead, she looked like a tuning fork still humming from the hammer's last blow. Now, in the lab, I knelt beside my bench, trying to accept that I would need to drive back to the Drury's trailer in Pittsfield the next day and ask for more blood. Not that I would admit I had spilled the first sample. Flora's husband wouldn't ask. At worst, I could lie and say I needed more of Flora's blood because her genes were so interesting, so vital for determining the cause of the illness that threatened us all. None of this calmed me. The drive to New Hampshire and back would consume half a day. I could see myself sitting in Rita's rusty Chevette, urging it on. The car would go slower the harder I wished, until by the time we arrived at the Drury's trailer, I would be clutching the dash and struggling to draw a breath. What I dreaded wasn't seeing Flora Drury so much as becoming her. One day I too might be sitting in a kitchen chair, shaking, until I shot up and flung myself about the room, shouting obscenities, as my mother had done that interminable year before she died of Valentine's. A 50-50 chance. Heads, I was healthy. tales, I had inherited the disease that killed my mother, her 2 brothers, and their father before them. Of the 23 pairs of chromosomes in each of my mother's cells, 1 pair contained a good and a bad gene. The egg from which I had developed might have contained a copy of the good gene, or maybe it contained the bad. Whichever it was, that gene was hidden among the 200,000 other genes strung along my chromosomes, imperceptible pearls on a necklace too tiny to be worn by a flea. Even with all the donors I had bled and all the DNA I had studied, I didn't have the slightest clue where to look. The earliest sign of Valentine's is clumsiness, and I was nothing if I wasn't clumsy. Never mind that the prospect of seeing my father, even on time, made me so nervous I could have dropped a dozen test tubes. There always were reasons. Rushing to the sink for a wad of paper towels to wipe up Flora's blood, I bumped into Susan Bate. The accident was her fault. Susan was always scurrying here and there in her big plastic goggles, chattering shit, 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 like a squirrel that suspects its nuts have been stolen. Even scientists less frenzied than Susan Bate and I bumped into each other in the course of a day. Knowing why we had collided didn't comfort me any more than it comforted me to know why I was always tripping over the threshold. The tiles there were warped. Excuses meant nothing, or rather they meant I was acting the way my mother had acted whenever I asked why she had cut her hand yet again, or forgotten to pick me up from science club, or why she had taken to cursing, foul, shocking oaths even my father wouldn't have said to a man. Always she had excuses, and these excuses made sense. Hadn't I believed them? And even if my own excuses were true, even if they let me reassure myself I wasn't sick yet, by the time I had contrived them, my heart had lost its rhythm. Already I had made myself so hyperconscious about not dropping anything, I was sure to drop the next object I touched. I made it to the street, unlocked my bike, and pedaled off. I was late. I had to rush. Even when I wasn't late, I had to rush. My mother had come down with Valentine's when she wasn't much older than I was now. I biked across the Charles River. A pair of elegant sculls skimmed beneath the bridge. The masts of slender dinghies leaned this way then that, like a troupe of ballerinas trailing white scarves. The State House dome shimmered on Beacon Hill. Farther west, the Citgo sign kept pointing to the sun, which was round and red as the drop of blood on Flora Drury's arm. I might have stopped to watch, but one of the telltale symptoms of Valentine's is the urge to stop and stare. I sped across the bridge, then darted past the cars circling the rotary at the other end. I stood on my pedals to make the hill. "Nice ass," a truck driver called. "Keep it moving, sweetheart." Boyishly small, with short hair and no hips, I rarely was the target of comments like this. I was so startled I didn't see the car door fly open ahead of me. I swerved just in time. If I had fallen and gotten hurt, I couldn't have explained my injuries to my father. He hated that his daughter, a woman in her 30s, still rode a bike. "You're not a child," he would have said. "Here, I'll write a check. Go and buy a good used Chevy." I would have protested I didn't need a car. This was Boston. Everyone here rode bikes, even Harvard professors with silver hair and bow ties. But my father was right. I liked feeling childish. A child didn't need to confront the possibility she might come down with Valentine's disease, or she might marry and have a child who came down with Valentine's, or she might grow too old to marry and have a child before she could figure out if she did or did not have the gene for Valentine's. On a smooth downhill stretch, I would sometimes ride with my arms out. How could anyone whose balance was so acute and who could pedal so quickly, even uphill, let death overtake her? Okay, so that's Jane. But I didn't want this to just be some kind of science story or science thriller. I wanted it to be a love story too. And so I thought, well, here's this woman who wants to find out whether she has a disease or not, so she would have time to marry and have a child. Well, who would she want to marry? Who would she fall in love with? And in real life, I saw that this researcher, Nancy Wexler, was doing a benefit to benefit Huntington's disease with Arlo Guthrie, the folk singer. You'll know who Arlo is. And so Arlo's father, Woody Guthrie, This land is your land, this land. Woody died of Huntington's disease. So Arlo was also 50-50 at risk, the way Nancy Wexler was. But Arlo had this completely different attitude, right? Which was, life is not a bet. It's not a matter of statistics, right? You can't have a perfect life. There's no such thing. And so you fall in love, you get married, you have kids, and if somebody gets a disease, you take care of them. If they die, well, you know, he said having a child even for one day is a blessing. And I thought, well, that's exactly who Jane's going to fall in love with, right? Because two such different attitudes. It's really interesting. What would they do? And you know, a guy like that would be the worst possible man for her to fall in love with. Not only now she has a 50-50 chance, he has a 50-50 chance. Together that means there's 75% chance one of them is going to have the disease, and any kid they had, same thing. So, but if you love somebody, right? So in the book, she falls in love with this figure who's based on Arlo Guthrie, and his father was a famous actor, and he's got some money left over from that. Basically, he's a hippie. He lives in the woods in New Hampshire, and they fall for each other, but she says, no, you know, you're literally the worst person we just can't do this. And so he pursues her by donating money to the research. And in real life, so to find a marker for a disease, you've got to get blood from huge extended family, right? So you have lots of people, some have the disease, some don't, and you look at their blood and you try to figure out if there's a pattern. And in real life, they thought, this is crazy, it's going to take you 1,000,000 years to figure out how this works. In real life, they found this extended family in Venezuela, in a remote rain jungle in Venezuela, and I didn't want to have to deal with doing research on that. So in my book, they find the family in Maine, on an island in Maine. It's much easier. So I'm going to just read you a couple pages. What happens is the guy, Willie, he finagles his way onto the trip where they're going to go up to Maine and take blood from all the people in Maine who have the disease that runs in the family. And Jane has to, okay, he comes along. And the only other thing you have to know is that Willie is a recovered alcoholic. So anyway, they're on this island. They've taken blood from everybody, and he thought it wouldn't bother him. You know, he's been like, oh, yeah, you know, and he has a son, right? And he's like, oh, whatever's going to happen, happens. But then they're on this island where, everybody has the disease, and it totally freaks him out. So he starts drinking. I've been a jerk about this whole thing, Willie said. He took a long swallow from the bottle. I wanted to come here with you, and I didn't think you would let me, so I gave your dad that check. I shouldn't have done that. But I'm just not sure how I feel about... I'm not about to take this test of yours, but you've got all these people out here living like this, and I do have my son to think about. He took an even longer swallow. What I mean to say is, I was hoping you would just sort of walk around with me a while, because all of this is shaking me up a lot. Those kids back there, and that young guy playing the saxophone, I didn't catch on at first, but then I started looking at how bad his hand shook. And Ted, my son, Ted, I kept thinking about what happens if he has it. And I'm in love with you, there's that too, so maybe you could come? He took a last swig of beer and sent the bottle flying. An enormous shape flapped furiously above the trees. If you don't come with me, I'm going to go back to that schoolhouse and finish off every last fucking beer in the joint. No, I said, I'll go with you. He didn't seem drunk as much as he seemed unmoored. I grabbed his hand, and suddenly I felt as if everything had been planned. By whom or what, I couldn't say. Willie and I were supposed to end up on this island. He wasn't my worst choice. He was my only choice, really. Who else could understand everything I had been through? With whom else could I strike an equal bargain? I'll risk caring for you if you'll take the same risk for me. We set off along the cliffs. Willie had borrowed the headlight from someone's bike, and he used it to light the path. Waves smacked the rocks below us. I didn't care where we went or what happened when we got there. Here on this island, a marriage between two people with Valentine's disease wasn't absurd. Here it made sense. Something speared my leg. I cried out. Willie swung the light and caught the gleam of antlers. The deer was dead, its mouth rubbery in a grimace. He knelt and touched its head gently like a man stroking his wife's brow to keep her mind off labor. He seemed sober by then. We walked another mile. The path turned to stone. A wave exploded beneath our feet. We stood like that. He put his hands around my waist. I leaned against his chest. I thought I had it beat, he said. I assumed he meant his drinking, but then he said, I just wasn't exposed to any of this before, not so much of it, all at once. When I'm by myself, I can convince myself, I guess this is how you felt all along. And here I was going on about how I wasn't afraid of dying. I'm not afraid of dying, I said. I mean, not the pain. I just can't give it all up. Being alive, everything, how I feel here, now, with you. He slid his hands along my ribs. I held my breath, waiting for the hands to move higher. But when you die, he said, it's not as if you know you're dead. It's not as if half of you stays behind and hears the other half crying in the dark, crying like you're lost. If only he would stop talking. If only he would lift his hand another inch. Don't you want to give up that other half, he said, the half that keeps watching? I think I would miss it, I said. Oh, that's only because it's been with you for so long. You're used to it driving you crazy. I told him I would stop driving myself crazy if I knew I didn't have it. Nah, he said, that wasn't true. Everybody's like that. Everybody except a few Buddhists who've attained Satori. I told him that despite what he might think, I wasn't the type of person who was going to spend her whole life sitting around trying to become perfect. I had too much to get done. He pulled away. You think I'm trying to lead the perfect life? You don't see me planning who I'm going to fall in love with according to a bunch of statistical formulas and graphs on a placemat. You don't see me spending my life trying to make sure I have this perfect kid. He doesn't need to be perfect, I said. Yeah? Tell me you wouldn't marry me right now if I could guarantee I didn't have the damn gene. That you don't have it. That we could have ourselves a 100% certified grade A healthy kid. He pressed his hands against my head. You know what nirvana is? I'll tell you what nirvana is. It's watching your kid eat Cheerios. You ever seen a kid eat a bowl of Cheerios? The way he dips the spoon in the bowl? The way he brings it up to his mouth and makes sure he gets everything in? The way he chews? He's not thinking about anything except those Cheerios. That's nirvana. And making love is nirvana, here on this ledge on the darkest night you've ever seen, and not thinking about anything else except making love. He unbuckled my watch. Then he burrowed in my trouser pockets and took out my radiation badge and a calculator. He made a pile beside the cliff. Don't think, I kept thinking. It occurred to me neither of us had brought a condom. Don't think, I thought again. Put your hand around his neck. Lie back. Don't say no. My foot hit a tin can. It clattered down the cliff. Willie started kissing me, and I couldn't think of anything except how lucky I was, because in the midst of so much nothing, I had been allowed to exist, to think everything I had ever thought, learn everything I had ever learned, feel everything I had ever felt. I had seen chicks in their shells, I had seen burning bushes and rotting deer, and I had been allowed to fall in love with someone as completely as I now loved this man. Thank you.
Thank you both for wonderful readings. We have books by Diane and Eileen out in the Gordon Theater lobby for sale, and I believe there's also a small reception. So eat and drink and buy books.